Bet the Board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, NFL Week 3, Monday Night Football edition. And because of a scheduling quirk, have not one, but two Monday Night Football games to close out this glorious week of sorts. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined, as always, by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. Payne, how goes it this fine Monday, my friend?
Not too bad. A little bit of a weird Week 3. It's been a weird season. It's kind of what we're depicting to our listeners. Just a lot of funkiness, a lot of new groups in the market. Data points are a little wonky because teams rested players early. There hasn't been a week where games haven't been impacted by weather yet, and so it's just been a little weird.
Hey, it's one of those things that's always a little bit challenging. You try and figure out the strengths and weaknesses of some of the teams you've seen, which data points prove to be a good litmus test, which ones prove to be outliers. And as we've seen in some of these primetime games, a lot of things that'll leave you scratching your head, which I think is probably the best place to start before we get into the full Monday schedule of events in terms of the good, bad, and the ugly, a little Sunday Night Football review. And Payne, look, I won't claim to have my analytics charts in front of me. I won't claim to know down to the third decimal point what exactly a certain decision does for win probability. That's why I have you on my side. Can you explain to me some of the decision-making tree that went into Josh McDaniels electing to kick a field goal down 8, taking it to a 5-point game before the silver and black never got the ball back, because we all know the Raiders have a top 5 NFL caliber defense?
I don't know what that was. We're watching the end game last night, and I'm texting you, and I'm texting a couple others, and it's like, boy, the Steelers caught a break here. 3 minutes to go. Raiders ball at the Steelers 29, 4th and 5. Then you think about all the components, right? It's like you have an offensive-minded head coach with Josh McDaniels. You have a quarterback that's familiar with the system. You spent the $140 million on a wide receiver that's got 13 receptions on the night. And the Raiders kick a field goal to take a one-possession game to a one-possession game. And then the Steelers commit a penalty, and my mind immediately goes to the movie Moneyball. When your opponent's making mistakes, don't interrupt them. And so, like, what a disaster decision going for the field goal there, and what a disaster decision trying to actually block the field goal was.
I mean, you sit there and watch this whole thing play out. Obviously, they get a second look at life, the Raiders, and then they have a first and goal situation. Decide, yeah, you know what, kicking the field goal once wasn't good enough. Let's do it again. Clearly don't get the football back, and the Raiders end up on the wrong side of a 23-18 decision. And suddenly that Raiders 17-16 win way back in week 1 against the Denver Broncos doesn't look to be nearly as important in terms of justifying their landscape and potentially a positive trajectory. As far as the Steelers, look, the offense may have gone out there and hit a few big plays, but to me, it still clearly looks broken, and they have a lot to figure out. They'll go back on the road next week and get tested by the Houston Texans. But before we truly get it, well, you know what? Let's get right into the good, the bad, and the ugly from a Sunday segue, unless there was anything else you wanted to add in terms of what you saw in a matchup of two iconic franchises last night.
I think you hit it perfectly in that the Steelers offense still has issues. You hit some chunk plays, the big one to Austin, but you look at the down-to-down success. There are 28 offenses that have played so far this week, and the Steelers were 21st in success rate. And something we kind of hinted Thursday, weren't quite sure what was going to transpire with Matt Canada and the Steelers organization. Boy, extremely loyal. They doubled down on Friday and then put more on Matt Canada's plate, promoting him to a more prominent role working with Kenny Pickett. So that was wild to see unfold. But, you know, that game was, I think we said in passing there towards the end, 3, probably a buy point on the Steelers. And to me, it's one of those games where we probably need to be a little bit better in factoring in and kind of, you know, we do power ratings. probably need to be a little bit more power rating centric than some of the matchups, because I think the easiest way to explain last night, 2.5 weeks ago, the Steelers closed with a season win total of 9, the Raiders 6.2, and somehow it was the team that was projected to win 9 catching 3 versus the team with a 6.2 win total. So that should have been a pure numbers play for us, and it just never made the card.
Yeah, and that was a game, quite frankly, where you saw in some of the look-ahead lines before the season started, the Steelers got bet up during the summer from pick 'em out to -2.5. So a 5.5-point swing. The Steelers end up getting the victory and move to 2-1 on the season. The Matt Canada promotion, Payne, reminds me of the episode of Seinfeld where Eddie's working for Elaine. She gets so fed up with him, she keeps promoting him up the ladder until ultimately they figure out he's incapable of doing anything. Maybe that'll be Matt Canada when he's named president of player personnel or operations, and that's when the Steelers have finally hit the ceiling and decided they need to move on from that particular direction.
I was just hoping that if the Steelers had lost, Mike Tomlin just walks Matt Canada to the 000 roulette table and is like, this is how efficient your offense is. You're going to stay here. You're gone. We're going to all head back to Pittsburgh.
It would have been the perfect way to try and put a bow on the Matt Canada era, but alas, he is given a little bit of a lifeline, and the Steelers will be road favorites for their Week 4 matchup against the Houston Texans. Into the good we go, and I think the most logical place to start with this particular category would be in your backyard, where it's the Miami Dolphins gaining 726 total yards against Denver, edging out the Rams' previous record of 722 yards, setting a 54-14 win over the New York Yanks back in 1951. No, that's not a typo. That's what the team was that they beat. No other team in NFL history has ever gained more than 683 yards in a game, so it's the 2023 Dolphins and 1951 Rams ahead of everyone else by a mile. They also tied the Rams for the second most points scored in a regular season game in NFL history, the record still being held by the Washington franchise, which scored 72 points way back in 1966. Tua's numbers off the charts, passer rating, yards per attempt, yards per completion, touchdowns per attempt, all first in the league. And it's Raheem Mostert and Devin Achane putting together a game for the ages against the Denver Broncos defense.
Yeah, I think you just said it there. I mean, there's really not much else that needs to be said. It was a historic performance. For me personally, it's the fastest offense I've ever seen. And Mike McDaniel's run game is extremely creative. You're watching that pitch get to the running back so quickly, and he's already in stride, that it's almost as if the running back is at the line of scrimmage at the same time the defender's kind of getting his hand out of the dirt and getting upright. It's just wild to see. The throw game is lethal. Remember, that was all without Waddle.
Yeah, that's what's even scarier.
The offensive line has improved. Now let's see if it takes a material leap with their horseback Teron Armstead at left tackle. We all saw the scoreboard. We all saw the highlights. Kind of let's shelve some of this conversation for the deep dive Thursday when Miami travels to Buffalo.
That works. You mentioned coming to the line of scrimmage with a full head of speed. It almost feels like a CFL component that the Dolphins have been able to build in there, so guys are in stride and have a chance to turn small, modest gains into big plays. Thing that stood out to me, Payne, we've been critical of Deshaun Watson and some of his lackluster performances. I know it's the Tennessee Titans secondary, but to Watson's credit, he goes out there and delivers 27 of 33, 289 yards, 2 touchdowns, gets Amari Cooper and Elijah Moore heavily involved. But it's not just what we saw offensively from the Browns. The defense continues to click, and it's a unit we believed was going to make major strides under Jim Schwartz's leadership through the first 3 weeks. Cleveland's defense performing like a truly elite level.
You have to be encouraged about the Deshaun Watson performance, the best of his Browns career to date. Now, the Titans are a pass funnel defense, fantastic stopping the run, can't stop a nosebleed through the air. So this was the right game plan employed by Stefanski. You saw a ton of motion. You saw quick passes, some trick plays. Even when you did elect to run, it was trying to get Deshaun Watson's legs going. But again, fantastic day through the air for Deshaun Watson. Only Tua was better in EPA plus completion percentage over expectation on the week than Deshaun Watson. You hope this builds a little bit of confidence and momentum moving forward for a big game this week against the division rival Baltimore Ravens. Defensively, we knew Cleveland was going to be substantially better under Jim Schwartz this season, but I would be lying if I told you they'd be the number one defense through 3 data points. The front is getting after the quarterback. The front is stopping the run. You added Delvin Tomlinson and Shelby Harris, and now through, again, 3 games, allowing just 25% of runs to be successful. So Browns defense right now fully entrenched under Jim Shorts.
They've been pretty impressive through the first couple weeks. We'll see this week with a pivotal showdown against the Baltimore Ravens. Other good that stood out to you so far this week?
I think you have to tip your cap to what's going on with the Houston Texans. I mean, we've seen C.J. Stroud show some flashes. Certainly more positives from his play through 3 data points than Bryce Young's, and I saw, when you actually break down some of the film and not just look at the numbers, I thought Stroud played well in back-to-back loss and to open the season, and then it kind of flew a little bit under the radar. But after 3 good performances, the Texans then go into Jacksonville and win outright as a large underdog for the second season in a row. I think it's time to give Stroud some love, especially when you think about what he's doing it with. Young kid on the road, and I understand it's not a hostile environment, but 4 starting linemen were out. And through 3 data points with a banged-up offensive line, a ground game that hasn't been overly efficient, still kind of finding chemistry with the receiver group, although it seems Tank Dell's become that go-to guy for Stroud. Stroud's 19th out of 34 quarterbacks in EPA plus completion percentage over expectation, so it's a really nice foundation to build on moving forward, and hopefully you get that O-line healthy, and the Texans are going to be in the mix in a division that has the ability for someone to kind of come out of nowhere, especially with the Jaguars struggling. Colts are a little bit better than we thought for sure, but that division's wide open in the South.
Yeah, suddenly appears to not be a one-horse race like odds makers led everyone to believe, with Jacksonville an overwhelming favorite before the season started. All 4 teams have shown flashes of being competent football teams. Be very interesting to see how things continue to unfold there. I want to give credit, Payne, to Jordan Love and the Green Bay Packers for coming back against the Saints. Now, I know it took an injury to Derek Carr that really changed that dynamic of the game, but Green Bay became just the 3rd team in the past 30 years to win a game after being shut out by a score of 17-0 or greater through the first 3 quarters, and they did it despite playing without Aaron Jones, without Christian Watson, without Jair Alexander, and 2 cogs on the offensive line, and David Bakhtiari and Elton Jenkins. But there seems to be a confidence coming from this Green Bay Packers team. They're saying the right things. And what they've noticed is that Jordan Love doesn't appear that he's wide-eyed and bushy-tailed out there in these particular moments. Matt LaFleur called this a win he's never been a part of in his coaching career. Green Bay erases a 17-0 deficit, knocks off the Saints, and they do so with an analytically sound decision, trailing by 14 points, going for 2, and they're able to capitalize, winning the game by 1 late in the contest.
So many places you can start. Your hope is that Jordan Love doesn't look like a rookie quarterback, right? He's been in the system for multiple years, but huge win, gutty, especially when you think about all those injuries you referenced. Christian Watson, Aaron Jones, both starting tackles, and Bakhtiari and Jenkins, your top cover corner, and Jair Alexander, they're all out. And it's this huge swing game for the Packers ahead of the Lions coming to town on a short week. And so you're not throwing games away, but the mental focus might not have been there initially. There is some room for improvement, right? The Packers offense has kind of been the same through 3 games, where it's very spurty, it's explosive, they're taking some deep shots, but it hasn't been overly efficient down to down, and the data confirms what my eyes have seen, where the Packers are 6th in EPA per play, 21st in success rate. If the down-to-down efficiency ticks up as the offensive health improves, the Packers should be better than expectation. The thing you signaled there so very smartly is what a decision, the correct decision, the one we will see more smart teams employing, I think, as we move forward, is down 14, going for 2, because the goal, the objective, is to win the game. And so when you can get that 2-point conversion, which is about a 50-50 shot, suddenly all you need is the point after to potentially win the game when you score a second time. I actually got 2 or 3 text messages just from like random people that I know. What are the Packers doing? Was that the right decision? What did you make of that? So very much the correct decision.
Well, if we're talking about correct decisions, before we go into the bad, I want to know if you had anything else good, and then we can revisit the Brandon Staley decision late in the game against the Vikings.
No, I think, you could certainly focus on the Arizona Cardinals as a positive, but I don't want to give them too much credit, although they're playing at least entrenched football right now. They're passionate, they care, they're flying around. But I do think I don't want to bury the lead here, as Mr. McCarthy made my bad section this week. So maybe that's the transition.
All right, we'll get to Mike McCarthy. Did want to get your take real quick on Brandon Staley's fourth down inside the 25. The Fox crew that was on after the game basically eviscerated him. I watch it from an analytic standpoint. Look, I don't have a chart in front of me when I'm watching the game. I know what the Chargers defense is. For me, knowing you can win a football game with one play, with offense being your strength, the execution may not have been there. We can be critical of the play call. I had no problems with the thought process, knowing that they weren't up just a field goal. The defense still could have gone out there, make a stop like they did. But clearly it was one of the more polarizing decisions from a head coach that we saw anywhere in the NFL yesterday.
Yeah, I thought it was awesome. And just go back to Thursday when we talked about Brandon Staley. What did we say?
Get back to your roots, baby.
Get back to your roots. And even though he's a defensive-minded head coach and his defense bailed him out with the big interception in the end zone to salt the game away, to me, that's the right decision. Now, the execution, to your point, not the best, but it's a Vikings defense that, especially on the ground, 25th in EPA per rush allowed. So you understand the thought process. And it's just one of those things where, hey, if I can't get a yard to win this game, I probably don't deserve to win it. All of the guys in the booth calling these games are guys who played decades ago. Old school mindset. Want to drum up some intrigue. To me, you try to gain a yard and win the game. You're on the road. You're 0-2. If we can't gain a yard, some trouble. So I thought that was the right move, especially just when you think about the context. The Vikings offense, typically the last 2 years, has been best in the fourth quarter, chasing. You have great wide receivers with Addison added to the fold, Hawkinson as a pass catcher over the middle. You don't have any confidence in a defense that's 31st defending the pass, and you know that's what you're going to be faced with. And so, to me, it was the right decision.
I'm right there with you there. And the fact is, you know, when you surrender, hey, look, put it on the defense. We still have a 4-point lead. Go out there and get a stop and prove that I made the right choice. They played with their backs against the wall, did enough to try and get them across the finish line, and very much saving the Chargers season, knowing that the Raiders will come to town next week. Into the bad we go, and you teased Mike McCarthy, Payne. I think you and I texted throughout that game that the Dallas Cowboys' defensive performances through the first 2 weeks against the Giants and Jets masked some of what the offense wasn't doing. And last week, or yesterday, I guess I should say, against the Arizona Cardinals, the offense did absolutely nothing to try and rectify those wrongs.
Yeah, like I said initially, like you definitely have to praise the Cardinals, right? I mean, they are. I understand the win total was low. We went under it, but they're at least fighting, right? They are entrenched early on in the season. They're passionate. Guys are flying around. They're playing hard, which you like to see. But Dallas was abysmal on Sunday. 13 penalties. Horrific situational execution, and I thought the creativity was really poor. Now, you had some negative variance, right? Because you look in the second half alone, the Cowboys had 4 different trips that reached the Cardinals' 8, 4, 8, and 6 yard line. Came away with a grand total of 6 points on those 4 drives. But this was the first time, to your point at the top, that we got to see if Mike McCarthy's offense could actually prove it was different. Right? The first time there was pressure to score. The first time where the Cowboys defense didn't play to expectation, allowing its offense to play free of pressure. And the Cowboys defense was able to overwhelm the Giants and the Jets to the point where Dak and McCarthy didn't need to be efficient. They were okay, but it's much easier calling plays when you have no pressure. It's much easier dropping back to pass when you have no pressure. And Mike McCarthy's offense this week was abysmal. Short throws. I mean, how about we move the ball downfield a little bit? You know you want to get the ground game going, and understand there were some injuries along the offensive line, but Pollard had a pretty efficient day in the ground. You're forcing the defense to load the box, stop that ground game. You're not pushing the ball over the top. Dak's completed air yards, 3.8 yesterday, third lowest of the week. You went out and you got Brandon Cooks. You have CeeDee Lamb. Why is every single throw short? I didn't understand some of the game plan. You're starting to get some of the second and long runs in too, which are a little bit head scratching. So I thought it was an abysmal performance. And what's concerning is it's fine if you kind of stub your toe. It's fine if you don't play to peak. You're not going to do that for 17 games in the NFL. But the ability to not overcome it and win on a bad day, you don't want to overreact to one game, to one data point, but like Super Bowl contenders, typically when they don't play their best against inferior opponents, just find enough. They just find that gear and win. And we didn't see that from Dallas yesterday.
No, and quite frankly, the defense couldn't even come up with a timely stop either late in that contest to give the offense the ball back with a chance to get over the hump. They come up a bit short in a 28-16 loss against the Arizona Cardinals. I'll take some of the low-hanging fruit here and go right back to the Chicago Bears, who were absolutely drummed 41-10. And then you get quotes like this from their head coach and Matt Eberflus. We've got to keep things tight in our locker room. That's the most important thing. There's going to be a lot of outside noise, as there always is in the NFL, and we've played 3 games so far in the season. We've got a great opportunity ahead of us. We've got 2 games in 11 days, so we're going to focus on that. Payne, I have no idea what the hell they're going to focus on because the team did nothing well yet again. They're running Justin Fields around in a game that had long since been decided, and when you do play stupid games, you win stupid prizes, and it's Justin Fields getting laid out by a middle linebacker for the Kansas City Chiefs despite chasing a 30-plus point deficit.
This is a really bad football team. And the defense we knew would be porous coming into the season. We hoped, I think, for some level of positive regression in that, the defense was historically bad last year. Can you just get to bad this year? And that hasn't been the case, and the defense has been hit by the injury bug at the linebacker group in the secondary. So that stuff's obvious. Offensively, it's bad. I mean, there's not a lot of creativity. The offensive line's dinged up. The ground game isn't very good. It's very difficult to get your playmakers the ball when you can't pass protect or when you have a quarterback that's not the most proficient throwing it. But I think you hit the biggest thing. What are we doing from a philosophy perspective? All of the talk this week was we need to get Justin Fields a little bit more acclimated to the game. We need to get him playing confidently. There was a quote from Justin Fields where basically he said, getting that first rush out of the way, hypes up the adrenaline and kind of gets me playing fast and free. And the game's over. It's 41-0. And you're running your quarterback late in that game, and all you're doing, if you know the vibe of these players, you ran Justin Fields on 4 or 5 straight plays to the point where Gay was like, I'm going to take this dude out. And that was a vicious hit. And so it doesn't make sense when you're down 41-0. Why are we not working on the things offensively to help Justin Fields moving forward? Why are we not working on the throw game? We know he can run. Showing us he can run in a 41-0 deficit does nothing. Let's figure out the pass game. Let's get him working in short yardage situations. Let's get him throwing into tight spaces around the goal line. Why don't we work on our red zone offense? We all know he can run. You didn't want to do it in the first half when the game was actually close. Why are you doing it down 41-0? And then just little decisions. You go for it on 4th and 8 from your own 40, but you're not going for it on 4th and goal from the 3. And then once you maybe get over the mental hurdle of like, hey, I don't want to be shut out here, so I'm going to kick a field goal like a pansy. Your quarterback is shaken up. You've gotten the goose egg off the board. Why are you putting him back out there at 41-3? It just made no sense. And everything that we had heard, and we've kind of kept this close to the vest, it's like Matt Eberflus was going to be fired by the Colts as their defensive coordinator. And like 3 weeks later, you made him your head coach. So it's not overly shocking. This is what's transpired.
No, and the Bears clearly have to figure out the best plan of attack going forward. It may be losing out, giving themselves a chance to draft a franchise quarterback in the form of Caleb Williams or Drake May, whichever direction they choose to go, should they have that number 1 overall pick in the draft. I had a number of other things listed on my bad. I mean, the Denver Broncos, not sure if that's low-hanging fruit. The Atlanta Falcons, inept offensive performance on the road against Detroit. The Jaguars, continued struggle, but I want to give you the opportunity if there was something that really stood out to you worth highlighting for our listeners.
Well, we talked about the Dolphins' offense, right? There's two components to that. One, it's really good, but the Broncos' defense apparently is really bad. And Vance Joseph just has not gotten it figured out with the current parts that he has. And we kind of saw glimpses of that last week with Sam Howell going up and down the field for Washington in the second half of that game. And through 3 data points, Denver's dead last in EPA per play allowed. Arthur Smith and the Falcons. Mr. Smith has done zero of what he talked about this offseason, about spreading things out, using more pace, being more creative in the throw game, not playing a 4 corners offense out of necessity to keep games close. I mean, we're getting 3rd and 6 runs down 10 in the green zone, and then we're kicking a field goal. I mean, it's very obvious defenses are selling out to stop the run. Bijan Robinson yesterday against the Lions saw 8+ man defenders in the box on 40% of his carries. For the season, Tyler Algier, 5th highest rate of 8+ man boxes. So I don't know if Desmond Ritter's the guy. It appears that he's not. And I understand you might not be confident in Desmond Ridder. But at some point, you're going to have to throw the ball on early downs, or else defenses are just going to stack the box and you're going to go on the road and score 6 points. Because it's not very difficult, no matter how talented your running back room is, no matter how good your offensive line is. When defenders have, when defenses put 8 in the box, it's very tough to run the ball. So you got to be able to throw it. And I don't know if the answer is Desmond Ridder. I don't love the backup quarterback situation, but he can at least throw the ball downfield. He's probably going to locate the other team, Mr. Heineke, but you at least have to get some pressure off the ground game. And if it's a boom or bust pass game with Heineke, it's at least threatening to the point where another defender or two might get removed from the box. So maybe you try that. I don't know.
Hey, look, I mean, I'm not sure if he's officially retired, but maybe Matt Schaub's out there somewhere that can command this offense and at least provide a semblance of a vertical threat. We saw 2 veteran quarterbacks reaching out to the Jets, and Matt Ryan and Carson Wentz. Maybe one of those guys wants to be back in Atlanta, or I should say Matt Ryan wants to be back in Atlanta, or Carson Wentz, but an interesting situation unfolding there. All right, with the good comes the bad, and then obviously the ugly, Payne, and I had 2 candidates down, so I'll lay out one of them, which was the Baltimore Ravens and their offensive game plan and overall output. The Colts' biggest weakness coming into the game was their secondary. Baltimore didn't attack downfield whatsoever. 5.1 yards per pass attempt. The intended air yards didn't exactly suggest a true vertical passing game with Todd Monken at the helm. Was completely underwhelmed with the way that Baltimore went about their business on the offensive side.
So obviously, for those that were able to access the website yesterday, because boy, you lovable degenerates crashed that thing looking for the best bet again yesterday. So we will navigate a new plan for that moving forward if we do not give out an actual best bet on the podcast. So a little disappointing we didn't get there. I believe, 41 points. We went over 43. Again, just a little bit of a frustrating season to start on the NFL side. College has been nails, but the process is there. You sit there and talk Thursday, hey, we're kind of waiting for this weather to clear out. You get a depressed price in the low 40s. It was like 42.8 when we send it out. Chris closes 44. There's probably maybe 2 handfuls of guys that are moving a game 90 minutes before kick with the limits, 1.2 points to the largest key of 44 on a Sunday. But the game plans for both teams were a little disappointing. You had I was looking this up. There should have been about, just based upon the yardage gained, about 46.4 points scored in that game. But neither had the best attack, specifically Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens offense. Lamar completed air yards 4.5. When you think about that matchup, the place you want to attack the Colts is through the air. I mean, that was a unit that we had pegged to be one of the worst in the league. It had not been great to start the season. And so you got Lamar, Todd Monken, you got your weapons. Let's push this ball downfield a little bit more. Where the Colts are strong is up front, defending the run game. And it wasn't like Lamar was pressured a ton yesterday either. I believe he had the 9th lowest pressure rate. I just didn't understand it. And even on the flip side, when you think about Shane Steichen, who 2-1, been fantastic, and it's very difficult to kind of question a guy who goes into Baltimore as a 7.5, 8-point dog and wins outright. But I would have thought a little bit more from his offense as well, right? We had Gardner Minshew last week for 2+ quarters. You have an entire week to adjust the game plan to Gardner Minshew. There was a lot of zone read where Gardner isn't an option to keep it, right? He's not Anthony Richardson. So I thought that was a little funky there. He didn't really attack the Baltimore defense that was down 3 starters in the secondary through the air either. There was a lot of, kind of throwaways deep, so it might skew some of the intended air yard data, but in truly like, hey, my first read is deep, there was not much of that. And so I was a little surprised by both offenses' game plans there. And even with the horrific game plans, there's 10 scores and you still can't quite get there. Baltimore fumbles it early, looking to go up 14-0, and that kind of probably would have gotten the Colts out of their shell. And then you get into a situation where even at half, 13-7, Todd, still feel pretty good, because it's very rare. It's very rare you can get a 7.5, 8-point favorite at home chasing points and not go over a low total of 43. That would be like an ideal situation for all overs, if you can get the large favorite chasing and playing catch up, especially with a total that low.
Yeah, you're sitting there trying to figure out all the different combinations, what you want to unfold in overtime with the Baltimore Ravens getting the ball first potentially, so they have to go out there and score a touchdown. However, the gambling gods did not smile kindly upon a game where there should have been more scoring, and anyone who watched that contest sees all the turnovers. You can have turnover luck on your side, which leads to points when you bet an over, or in this case, all the turnovers seem to take points off the board, with teams falling on their fumbles in basically deep in their own end. And then you mentioned the big turnover early from the Baltimore Ravens when it looked like they were poised to put points on the board. I want to talk about Sam Howell and the Washington Commanders offense, because everybody was running to anoint them the greatest thing since sliced bread. And look, they deserve full...
Whoa. Not everyone.
No, everyone in mainstream media. I apologize for that. And I give them full credit. You raced a 32-3... you went on a 32-3 run against the Denver Broncos. Suddenly, after we watched Denver play defense, that has a little bit of a luster lost a touch. Howell's honeymoon phase officially came to an end. Finished with 4 interceptions, including a pick in the end zone, and coming up short on downs inside the 3-yard line early in the game. And while you mentioned Washington or the Bears and what they did late in the game, Washington has a chance to build a little bit of confidence. Sam Howell marches them into the green zone, and the Commanders subsequently let their starting quarterback get sacked 3 times and decide they want to kick field goals and everything else that unfolds. I'm not even sure what the hell was going on in that game, but people that want to put Sam Howell and Eric Bieniemy in the Hall of Fame may want to slow their roll at least just a little bit after what we saw against a real complete football team in the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, for us, we always really like to be transparent. We just do it in our way, and it's more in passing than a pounding of the table. But overall, right, college football, NFL kind of will give the listeners a glimpse into our life this past week. It was a profitable week, but we went into Sunday thinking, hey, we got a chance here to have a monster week, and it just didn't unfold that way. One of, again, the weather games that we kind of insinuated, hey, we kind of want to wait on this one, let the weather impact kind of knock this down. So again, game day morning, we go over 42.5 in this game. And it obviously ends up falling short. And that was kind of the summation of our day, where you can go over 42.5, get one team to score 37, and you can't get it over. And another game, you go under 49.5, one team's got 0 for 56 minutes, and somehow it goes over. That was basically our Sunday yesterday. But the one thing you asked me exactly a week ago was about the hype train for Washington. I said, hey, let's slow this down a little bit. They didn't really do anything against Arizona in the opener. Came out and were down 21-3 to Denver, and then just kind of had a little spurt there in the third and fourth quarter. And now all of a sudden you're stepping up in class against a Buffalo defense that's been very good, and we now see that Washington is not on the class of Buffalo. That's obvious. I think the question moving forward is, when they start to play some opponents in their class, can they have, some relative success? Right now, through 3 games, even with that wildly efficient performance in the second half against the dead last Denver Broncos defense, the Washington Commanders 27th in EPA per play.
It's all about context and figuring out exactly what these teams are going to be. It won't get any easier for Washington, even though they draw a division foe on the road in a short week, as they'll take on Philadelphia right around a touchdown underdog. You can follow Payne on X at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there as well. Most importantly, for all things Bet the Board, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And Payne, real quick, when we run through the look-ahead lines, we can kind of get into these rapid fires. I know we took a little bit longer than anticipated on the good, the bad, and the ugly, but I think it's so important early in the year when we don't truly know who these teams are. We don't have a strength of schedule level of clarity. So I think we did an outstanding job there. Buffalo Bills were a 3-point favorite for their big showdown in the division. That number has come off with a key of 3, now down to Buffalo minus 2.5 as they'll welcome in the Dolphins.
Yeah, let's call it 2.8. Now, I thought this would have a chance to leak to 3. One spot did. It did not last. I don't know where this goes. Your belief is either the Miami Dolphins are extremely scary, and I'm trying to figure out how to position this without completely divulging everything I'd love to divulge here. Miami's offense is really good. That's very clear and obvious. It was really good before they hung 70. You think about what they did in week 1, right? Brandon Staley was the guy that kind of gave Mike McDaniel trouble last year, really stifled that offense. Mike McDaniel went out this offseason, figured it out, fixed it. We thought the offensive line would improve a little bit. Against Belichick, all of a sudden he's going to throw this 3-safety look and make you dink and dunk the ball downfield. Not a problem. We were able to change our, kind of go chameleon mode and completely do something different, and we got Belichick and we figured it out. Now all of a sudden you hang 70, and it's like we were taking the foot off the gas. Right. Could have set the record if you wanted.
Should have set the record. It would have been a lot more fun
and
that
now,
way.
Right? And you think about how they've done this over the 3 games. It's like, hey, or $80 million left tackle hasn't played twice. Jalen Phillips, our premier pass rusher, sat out. Jalen Ramsey has not shown up yet. We are learning a wildly different defensive scheme under Vic Fangio, in which we are not quite used to that yet, but at some point the light's going to come on. And if the Dolphins stay healthy and the offense remains what it does, and Vic figures out we're going to be talking Super Bowl stuff. I don't know if that's what transpires here. And the price in my mind, I know last week it was Buffalo 3, and now it's 2.5. And, I don't know where this goes. My mind initially said Buffalo would take some money and it would get back to 3. Some of the poor performances the Dolphins have had in Buffalo are games that transpire later in the season, right, with inclement weather, which gives them a little bit of an edge, because if you've listened to us over the years, we crank up Buffalo's home field advantage as the season goes on a little bit. That's not the case. You get them here in, what is it going to be, September or early October? I don't know exactly when the game takes place. Sunday, is that going to be October?
I think it's October 1st, yep.
Okay, there you go. So you get them at a little bit better of a time. I don't know. I need to wait and see. I think that's my best. I envisioned this game going to 3. Think about last year. I understand in the playoffs you had a 7th-round rookie going into that game. The spread was 14.
Yeah, it was a big number with Skylar Thompson under center.
Right. And so, I understand Tua's fantastic, but, within how many data points now? We've had 3 games for each this season. That was the Dolphins' final game. And I understand an offseason changes a lot, but, talking like an 11.5 point swing, like 3 data points.
He was extremely valuable, Payne. Maybe the most valuable quarterback in the NFL when you look at the drop-off, although you wouldn't know it watching Mike White out there slinging touchdown passes.
So you get kind of where I'm going. Like, I don't have a stance on this yet.
Yep.
But I thought we might get to 3. It kind of did overnight, and then it didn't last, so I'm not quite sure. This goes.
The dumpster fire of the week takes us to Soldier Field, and only in the NFL can a team go out there, lose by 100 points, and go from 1.5-point favorites on the road in the look-ahead market to more than a field goal favorite, which may say just as much about the Bears as it does the Denver Broncos.
Injuries and a massive coaching edge. Yeah, we have a Super Bowl guy leading the Broncos who I think probably gets the troops rallied up here. I don't know where it goes from here. I don't know the side at 3.5, but very early money on Denver just based upon having a clue at the head coach position. And then the Bears defense just so many injuries. So you'll have to monitor the report there.
Fire up the Jarrett Stidham game plans out there in Denver. Can he play both ways? Because they're going to need help when it comes to trying to solidify that defense, but maybe the Bears provide the perfect cure-all. This game looks like a major move in terms of number, and it will be for teaser purposes, but it doesn't go through any of the keys. The Ravens go from a 2.5-point road favorite at Cleveland, and now the Browns listed as a short home favorite.
Yep. Be interesting to see where this goes. My inclination is there would be a massive buy order on the Ravens if this were to get to 3.
I can understand completely there. And last but certainly not least, a game that should have plenty of intrigue Sunday afternoon between the New England Patriots and the Dallas Cowboys. We were looking at the Cowboys more than a touchdown favorite in that 7.5 range. That hook has come out of the market. We are now painted 7 across the board. Some shops even trending in that 6.5 range in a game that actually took a little bit of over money while we started recording early this morning.
On the scoreboard, I fully understand the Patriots exceeded expectations, but boy, that should not have been that close to where you have to ward off a Hail Mary that almost ended your season. I didn't love what I saw from New England in that Jets game, which was pretty wild. And I think something we intimated a little bit earlier is professional bettors are not going to completely sell the Cowboys off of one data point. I think you have to check the injury report. Some guys along that Cowboys offensive line, rather. I also believe defensively you might have a little bit better of a game plan this week because Diggs went down so late last week, you kind of had to change everything on the fly there late. And now you've kind of lived life without him for a week. It's a tough loss, but schematically, game plan-wise, you're going to be able to scheme for him being out of the lineup where when he just randomly goes out on a Friday and you're traveling for a game Sunday, right? Like shit kind of hits the fan.
Ezekiel Elliott homecoming, must-see TV. We'll see what Zeke does in return. Got a lot more of the workload than I anticipated going into the game against the Jets. Looked to be a little bit more sprightly than when he was wearing the star on his side of the helmet. When we break down all of these games, injuries obviously a major part of everything you do as a sports bettor, a fantasy player, whether it's season-long or DFS, and we have one of the best in the business to share his perspective. You can follow Doctor Deepak Chona on Twitter at SportMDAnalysis as he fills you in on everything you may have missed so far during NFL Week 3.
Are you injured or are you hurt?
When injuries occur in the NFL, you need someone to call on.
If you're hurt, you can still play. If you're injured, you can't.
Let's check in with Dr. Deepak Chona, Stanford and Harvard-trained orthopedic sports surgeon and founder of Sports Med Analytics, the industry leader in data-driven injury analysis.
So are you hurt or are you injured?
All right, thanks for the intro, guys. Now, we didn't actually have a ton of injuries on Sunday itself, but there's still a lot to talk about. So the biggest name that went down, probably Derek Carr. We saw by video what looked to be an AC joint sprain of his shoulder, and reports later have confirmed that. Now, when you take all positions, the average AC joint sprain takes about 2 to 3 weeks to return. This is, of course, a quarterback and his throwing shoulder, so we would lean towards it being on a little bit longer side. So probably 3 to 4 weeks would be the initial guess for Derek Carr. But again, we're going to learn a lot about his practice reports over the next 2 weeks. to see if he is going to make a little bit earlier comeback. Then we have Patrick Mahomes. Now, this one's relatively minor. He had his ankle rolled up on at the end of the first half. He did return to the game with some tape on the ankle. This is not likely to impact his performance, but the thing to keep in mind is if he were to have a repeat injury to this side, to this ankle specifically, within about the next 2 to 3 weeks, he would be a little bit more prone to a more severe version of an ankle sprain or injury. So this is something to keep an eye on for Patrick Mahomes, but no concerns right now. Then Mike Williams. Now this one unfortunately looked bad. He had his foot planted in the ground and there was a severe rotation with the knee in a position where it's vulnerable for an ACL tear. So the video certainly suggested that would be the most likely outcome here. Now there is a possibility in the best case scenario that he would have just sprained the knee, basically like an MCL sprain with probably a bone bruise, and that would be in the 2 to 4 week range. But unfortunately, I think the most likely outcome is that on Monday we'll find out the MRI says ACL tear. And then Gus Edwards, now he was put in concussion protocol, and in that case, about 2/3 of players would miss the next week and come back after one game missed. And Justin Jefferson briefly gave us a scare, but it actually turned out to just be cramps, and you could tell by both the reports after and the fact that he re-entered the game and the way they were stretching him out on the field. So overall, nothing that should linger for Justin Jefferson. Now I want to talk about Nick Chubb's injury briefly. He had, of course, the gruesome looking injury, and then we heard a lot of mixed reports. Initially, he went to the hospital, which you don't normally do for a standard knee injury. And with Nick Chubb, now they're saying the only thing that was frankly torn is the MCL, and that's good news. There is also noteworthy that it's a partial ACL tear involved as well. So essentially what this means now is when he goes to surgery, he'll go to sleep, and then when he's asleep, you can get a really good thorough examination of his knee because he's not going to be in pain and feeling it. So at that point, if his ACL is a little loose, there's a couple different options, but the most reliable one is probably to treat it as if it's a full tear and reconstruct the ACL. And then at that time, it sounds like they're probably going to treat the MCL with a reconstruction as well. So in this case, it actually is one of the more favorable combinations if you have to have two ligaments injured. And for that reason, a 9 or 10 month return is very realistic for Nick Chubb, and he does have an excellent shot to be ready week 1 of next year. Now, if you're thinking in terms of dynasty football, should I buy low? Just consider that he is projected to have a pretty real performance dip early on, but by the end of the season, he projects to have recovered most of his pre-injury explosiveness, about 90 to 95% in our data by the end of next year. Next, Jerry Jeudy. Now, he is no longer injured, of course, but that hamstring injury, I think, was still affecting him for his performance last week, and he's trending up. He had a much better performance in week 3, and week 4 is when the data predicts that Jerry Jeudy's back at 100%. He does have still a slight re-injury risk elevation until about week 6, but for now, we think Jerry Jeudy's a great target to hop on the train right before he hits 100%. Then Joe Burrow playing tonight. Now, he has a calf re-aggravation, and we talked about this before, but the key with these is the re-injury risk going forward. So Joe Burrow can probably play, and it sounds very likely that he's going to try, and he has taken first team reps. So we would lean towards that being the outcome here. But the important thing to remember is that Joe Burrow is going to be playing through a pretty high re-injury risk. If he does get a re-aggravation of this previous strain, that would probably put him on the IR, probably looking at least 4 weeks for that to heal up. The key, though, is that taking 1 week off here isn't likely to drastically lower Joe Burrow's re-injury risk. That is probably around 20% right now, but about 6 weeks is what it would probably take for it to go down less than 10%. Next, Puka Nacua. He's got an oblique injury. He is projected to play. These typically, when players are active, don't cause much of a performance hit, so not too concerned there. And then Devontae Smith, also projected to play tonight. his progression from being put on the injury report midweek and then quickly getting off of it and returning to full practice suggests that this is a very mild issue and not one that's likely to cause any performance hit or any lingering re-injury risk. Next, we have Deebo Samuel. He got injured Thursday. We know there's no rib fracture, which is, of course, good news. Typically, in these cases, players would be able to play the following week without a major re-injury risk. The one thing to keep in mind, though, is that performance dips up to about 15% on average for wide receivers for about 2 weeks. Next, Anthony Richardson and Jalen Waddle both missed this week with concussion protocol and are very likely, about 3/4 of the time, would return in week 4. Then we have Austin Eckler. Now, we've heard a lot of things about him. His comments have suggested a high ankle, and the reported timeline also suggests the same. Now, the average on these is about 3-4 weeks. So if you look at that alone, that would put him around that week 5 bye. So it's a question of, do you rush him and go for week 4, or do you take it slowly, lower that re-injury risk, and go week 6? And the comments that came out on Thursday going into the weekend certainly suggest they are looking towards that week 6 target. So Austin Eckler, when he comes back, would have a little bit lower re-injury risk, but it is still elevated compared to baseline, and probably a 2 to 3 week mild performance hit based on the amount of rest he's gotten. Then we have Christian Watson and Aaron Jones. Both were ruled out on Sunday for the Packers. The Packers have historically been a very conservative staff when it comes to returning players from injury, so it's not entirely surprising that this occurred. However, with Christian Watson, he had a DNP on Thursday of this prior week, and we have to wonder, although they said it was not a setback, we do have to wonder to a degree, was that just sort of team propaganda, and was it in fact a setback? Because had he logged a limited practice, our algorithm would have predicted him at about a 70 to 75% chance of playing going into Sunday. Again, with the Packers playing this coming Thursday, it's possible they were just trying to be very conservative with both of these guys, as both do have an elevated re-injury risk for another couple of weeks as they return. But they both are trending towards playing on Thursday. Christian Watson, we have at 60%, and Aaron Jones at about 70%. Next, Saquon Barkley. Now, Saquon, we know now for sure, is dealing with a high ankle, which is what was suggested by the video to begin with. The key with these is that if you rush the return, you see a bigger performance hit initially and a bit of a re-injury risk as well. So Saquon is talking about potentially trying to return week 4, and they are playing Monday night, so it gives him a little bit of extra time. But even still, it seems unlikely, as he would be about 3 to 4 days ahead of average if he were to play. So with Saquon, the most likely outcome by the data is a week 5 or 6 return, but keep an eye on his practice reports. He's really seems to be targeting a week 4 return, but if he does, we would expect some real performance hits, probably in the 15 to 20% range. And next, David Montgomery. Now, he's actually on my buy low considerations for season-long fantasy owners. He is dealing with a quad contusion. He said it would be a couple of weeks. Dan Campbell's comments suggested it was going to be day-to-day to start off. And the data actually does more so line up with what Dan Campbell was saying, in the sense that these don't tend to cause a lot of multi-week absences. So David Montgomery, by the data at least, would have a pretty good chance of playing this weekend. Now, the key with these also is that they're relatively low on their performance impact and they're relatively low on their re-injury risk. The only real question is, are they going to give Jahmyr Gibbs and the rest of their backfield some more touches to ease him back in, since they do have that depth? But the data would say that's not the typical route. So when David Montgomery comes back, we expect him to be at or near his pre-injury performance. And that is all we have for today, so I'll kick it back over.
Positive news there, Payne, on Nick Chubb's knee injury not being as devastating, at least as it appeared when we watched it in real time last week. Easy for me to say, of course. Unfortunately for the Chargers and Charger fans, Deepak didn't sound so optimistic about Mike Williams and his potential impact. So Quentin Johnston, you become the next man up in terms of one of Justin Herbert's more heavily relied upon weapons on the outside.
Fingers crossed for Nick Chubb. Just everything I hear, a great dude. You saw the injury and you're like, geez, it's to the same knee. Let's hope this isn't a career ender. Fingers crossed the MRI is correct and that when the surgeon goes in there and opens him up that he doesn't see other stuff. But good news on the surface so far. Let's hope that's actually the case. In terms of the Chargers having another injury, what's fucking new? I don't understand what's going on with that organization and all the injuries. I just don't get it. Quentin Johnston on the surface is the big-bodied receiver that you would think replaces Mike Williams. A lot of Palmer in that game late.
Palmer's all interesting for the skill set he offers. He's not quite the same big body, but he's a little bit more of a burner. And you saw Justin Herbert last year.
He's actually like a better receiver?
Well, yeah, I mean, I was...
Quentin Johnston, by all prop players, were like what was one of the biggest fades this offseason. Now it becomes a little bit of a sweat because of Mike Williams going down.
Well, I mean, look, if you're going to try and bring in a player in Quentin Johnston that you're not optimistic about, you may as well try and figure out what you're doing elsewhere and bring overdrafting his teammate and Max Dugan as well. So, I mean, there's a number of different things that the Chargers do, thinking outside the box. Some of the other injuries will obviously highlight the upgraded potential status of Christian Watson and Aaron Jones that Deepak hit on, knowing that Detroit and Green Bay will get a deep dive on Thursday's show. All right, into the two games that we have on the docket for tonight. One of them a little bit more in depth, the other all about the will he or won't he play, that of course referencing Joe Burrow. And when you look at Philadelphia and Tampa, you talk about teams with improbable starts, and the Bucs maybe fall into that bucket to a certain extent, but I think there were folks out there in the betting market who thought this team was being eulogized a little bit too quickly. This will be one of their first true tests where we see Tampa welcoming in Philadelphia as 5-point underdogs. Total on the game sits at 45. It's the only matchup of 2-0 teams that we had on the schedule during week 3. The Bucs will seek their 5th 3-0 start in team history. You have to go back to 2005, the last time they accomplished that feat. Mayfield, it's his first 2-0 start of his career, a 2-8 record last season. And Baker, when you look at all the teams he played for a season ago, I'm not sure anybody thought he could potentially be the answer to lead Tampa's offense as effectively and efficiently as he has thus far. It's obviously a matchup of former Oklahoma quarterbacks and Jalen Hurts going up on the other side. But Philadelphia, Payne, reason for optimism. It looks like this team with extended rest should be significantly healthier for this game than the last time we saw them outlasting the Minnesota Vikings on Thursday Night Football.
Yeah, that appears to be the case. And it's mostly on the defensive side of the ball, which I think is the interesting part of this matchup. And based on personnel, right, and strength of schedule and what we heard during camp, I think we both came into the season thinking the Eagles' defense would decline year over year. And then last Wednesday, you see the first Eagles injury report. It's like 7 key defensive players are on it. And now you fast forward, and it's like Bradbury, Blankenship, Sweat, Cox, Cunningham, Davis, and Edmonds all got full practices in on Saturday. So let's monitor that leading up to game time. Obviously, Avonte Maddox is on IR. You got Nakobe Dean still out. But really, where I'm hesitant and why I haven't joined the Buccaneers party tonight is because of Baker Mayfield. And I fully understand he fits Dave Cannell's system extremely well. And Mayfield knows this is likely his last chance to be a starter in this league. Vibes are good. He has nice weapons in Evans and Godwin. But I really deep dive the 2 opening games, and I'm kind of left thinking meh. Right? It's like Baker Mayfield and the Bucs had a 21% success rate in the first half against Minnesota's defense week 1. It's not a great defense. And then the worst kept secret is Baker apparently figured out all the Vikings signals in the second half. And so my suspicion is that won't be the case against the buttoned-up Eagles organization with extra time. And then once you get past the opening script against 31st ranked Chicago Bears defense, Baker and the Buccaneers were 24th in success rate in the second half. Couldn't Philly kind of stamped that victory home until Shaq Barrett had the pick 6. There's a very large matchup advantage on this side of the trench for Philly too, right? The Buccaneers O-line through 2 data points, bottom 7 in the league in both pass block and run block win rate. and they've played the Vikings and Bears defensive fronts. I'm going to be extremely kind in saying that both were projected to have below average units heading into the season, and below average is the extremely kind part of that sentence. Again, like very sharp money on the Buccaneers, but we try to treat listeners differently here, and everyone can see the game open 7 and we're now down as low as 4.5. So I kind of wanted to approach this handicap in more of a, hey, this is why I didn't, and I believe Todd, I could use the word we, didn't really join the Buccaneers party tonight, rather than talk about Tampa being fantastic because everyone has eyes and saw the movement on the screen. And I just wonder if you're buying the Buccaneers at their peak because they've beaten the 0-6 Vikings and Bears. This line was 6.5, 7 prior to the season. I think part of that, though, is maybe what the Eagles' offense hasn't shown through 2 data points.
Well, and you mentioned the Eagles' offense. I mean, you saw them operate in fits and spurts. They were able to run the football like a college team to find success against the Minnesota Vikings, but it doesn't mask some of the ineffectiveness that we've seen in the passing game. I mean, A.J. Brown has, to a certain extent, been a little bit of an afterthought. 7 straight games going back to last season where he's now been under 100 receiving yards if we include the playoff games. DeAndre Swift was the bell cow back, carried it, plenty of times to the tune of 175 rushing yards. It was the most by an Eagle since LaShawn McCoy in 2013. But you dig into Jalen Hurts' numbers thus far, passing-wise, 29% completion percentage when he's throwing 15-plus air yards this year. It was 48% last season. 6.8 yards per attempt targeting A.J. Brown compared to 10.1 last year. And he was pressured on a significant amount of his dropbacks. Brian Johnson obviously learning on the fly in terms of what he needs to do as an offensive coordinator. But do you see a path for success, Philadelphia having extra time to get right against the Tampa defense?
Aside from some of those injuries for the Eagles defense, this is the other part of the equation into why we've seen Tampa money come in. It's just based upon how disjointed the Eagles passing offense looks through 2 games. And when you need to win by margin on the road in this league, you got to be able to pass it. And you mentioned some of those Hurts numbers through 2 data points. Right now as a team, the Eagles throw game dead last with a 36% passing success rate. There doesn't appear to be answers for all the looks the Eagles have seen. Plays are coming in a little bit slower. There isn't this natural rhythm to the offense. And I think we probably understood there might be an adjustment period with a new OC and Brian Johnson, but if the pass game is inefficient like it's been, this is a Buccaneers defense that, is a little bit better than the Vikings, right? The Eagles aren't going to be able to just turn around and run inside zone the entire night and bully a Todd Bowles defense with Vita Vea up the middle, and I think that's probably where some of the hesitation comes again for the Eagles offense. Now, again, we haven't been part of the sharp Tampa money. I just respect the Eagles organization so much that I don't want to bet against them not figuring it out with extended prep time. And you also have to put some things into context here in that the Eagles played in a monsoon against Bill Belichick, who had an entire offseason to prepare for the opener. And then on a short week for the Eagles, they had to deal with Brian Flores from the Belichick coaching tree and this really funky 3-safety look they saw. And this also has to be about Tampa, right? I think we just assume because many of the same parts returned for Todd Bowles that the Bucs defense is going to be top 10 again, and maybe it will be. But the defense hasn't been tested yet for Tampa. I mean, they faced the Bears offense in the opener, or the Vikings offense in the opener, and then you got the Bears offense in your home opener. I mean, Chicago's 31st in EPA per play on offense. There isn't a bigger disaster that had expectations offensively than the Chicago Bears right now. And you've had Todd Bowles with an entire offseason to prepare for a one-dimensional Vikings offense in the opener, right? You filter out some of the fourth quarter stuff when Cousins and the Vikings tend to rack up gobs of meaningless production, and the Vikings offense is 19th in EPA per play the first 3 quarters. And so there's some underlying concerns maybe for Tampa's defense here. You also have to look at their injury report. Some guys in the secondary a little bit dinged up. So this was a tough game for me. I really respect some of the guys that are on Tampa. Now, this price is a little bit different of a conversation when you're talking about, hey, we took 7, we're now at 5. This did get to as low as 4, and there was immediate buyback on the Eagles. Now, the next move is probably the most important when you think about game day, the limit size. Does this crash down to 4 again on game day, or do we kind of just hold 5? Do we even sneak to 5.5? Not that that's an important number, but you kind of get where I'm going with that next move and its importance here. Again, for me, I just can't do it on Tampa. And as we were recording on Thursday, kind of made the insinuation where, well, there goes this total. And I had agreed with that at 46. We're now down to 44.5. So this is a tough game for me. And I'm going to be watching it intently. Again, I respect the guys that are in Tampa. I just couldn't get there myself.
Look, there are plenty of battles worth fighting. Sometimes going in when you have questions about both teams and how some of the matchups will play out, it doesn't bear trying to bet on it to find out if your preconceived notions are going to be either justified and or verified in any capacity. So we'll wait and see exactly what we get from Philadelphia and Tampa in the first of the 2 Monday Night Football games. We have the late game, though, and this one is surrounded with all sorts of intrigue based on the status of the starting quarterback for the Cincinnati Bengals, that, of course, being Joe Burrow. We saw this number open in the 6 range. It took immediate money on the underdog and under early in the week, and the betting market hasn't been able to make a determination in any capacity, Payne, if they think Burrow will be out there. We've seen it go to 3. We've seen it back to 1.5. We're watching it get touched up right now, sitting at pretty much 2.5 painted across the board. There is a 3. Always interesting when Jamar Chase comes out and says, look, I don't think Joe Burrow should be out there. There was talk the Bengals could put him on IR, but he's still a game time decision. We heard Deepak mention the calf injury, saying that there is a much higher probability for re-injury, but even if he sits out a week or 2, it won't help. If they really want it to heal, it's 4 to 6 weeks. So many different question marks about Burrow that I'm not sure it's worth discussing the Bengals offense against the Rams defense, because if it is Jake Browning, look, anybody who's watched Jake Browning going back to his time at Washington and in limited preseason action isn't going to be wowed with what he does in terms of his arm strength or his command of throwing outside the hashes. So instead of doing that, let's focus on the other side of the ball with this Rams offense that appears to have established at least an identity with Matthew Stafford back in the mix, averaging more than 320 yards per game passing in terms of counting stats. First season of his career with back-to-back 300-yard games to start a season. When you look at how effective they've been in the red zone, they're scoring touchdowns, they're converting on third downs, you're getting players like Kyron Williams and Puka Nacua to really contribute. The Rams offensively through 2 games, mirage or something sustainable as they start going forward?
So let's do this first of all, because as we record, right, Cincinnati's taken a touch of money. First of all, I think we probably now, and it's hindsight's 2020, is we probably should have had the Bengals sit Joe Burrow for the first couple of games, get him 100% healthy. Now you're in this weird situation where you're 0-2. Higgins isn't going to be re-signed. You went out and inked Orlando Brown to this massive contract to go make a Super Bowl run. And if you rest Joe Burrow for the next 4 to 6 weeks, your season might be over by the time he gets back.
Might be. So it probably is over.
Right. But that's the mental gymnastics currently going on in the Bengals organization. Okay? And you understand why it's a difficult decision right now. If they had to do it all over again, they're resting him, they're sitting him out the first 2 weeks, and obviously you're 0-2 as it is with him. From a numbers perspective, we have Burrow worth 8 points when fully healthy because we don't really know what Jake Browning is. Certainly if Burrow plays, he's not going to be 100%, so you can't give the full 8 points. But through 2 games, Burrow's 29th in EPA per dropback. He's completing 56% of his passes. He's completed 1 pass the entire season from under center. My feeling is if Burrow somehow gets upgraded, Cincinnati probably closes 3.5-4. If Burrow is announced out, probably Rams move to about a 1.5 point favorite here. Offensively, I know we want to get to the Rams. Do you kind of want to lead us back in, or do you want me to just shoot there for the Rams?
No, we can go. We can go there. I think that was a good way, and I apologize if I shortchanged the handicap a little bit in terms of
No.
Joe
I think
Burrow's
everyone
evaluation,
wants to
because I think
talk
it is
Burrow.
important. I think it is important to mention, though, what he's worth when he's healthy compared to the shell of Joe Burrow that we've seen through 2 weeks, knowing that he doesn't have the full route tree. He doesn't have that full level of mobility, and how Cincinnati has been able to change their offense, albeit ineffectively, and you've seen Joe Mixon kind of become the beneficiary in a lot of those things. But the Bengals defense, no doubt, with or without Joe Burrow today, is going to have to step up. They're going to need to try and play their A game if the Bengals are to salvage their season, get a win tonight, and can start to build some of that momentum going forward. The Rams, look, they go on the road against Seattle 27-13. We weren't sure if it had more to do with Seattle's shortcomings defensively, and that was going to be a one-off. But the Rams, even in defeat when they lost by 7 last week to the 49ers, showed a higher level of competence and execution that we saw even last year early in the season when Matthew Stafford was actually healthy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really the equation here is like you have McVay, you have a Hall of Fame quarterback in Matthew Stafford, who is working with a much healthier offensive line this season than last. And then you look around, and it's Puka, who you mentioned, and Tutu and Kyron that are leading the way offensively for the Rams. And I'm starting to wonder if Matthew Stafford knows his wife Kelly is a little bit of a chatty patty and had her run some misdirection, hoping she'd tell the world that he's struggling connecting with the young players in the locker room, because it's been a 180 from that through 2 data points. All the young kids are playing really well right now, and so I think this is a big lesson for you here, Todd, is newly married, sometimes pillow talk leaves the bedroom, and that appears to be the case here. Okay.
No, my better half just chooses to make fun of me because I know absolutely nothing about pop culture, so I probably also would have a hard time relating to skill position players that were wearing Rams jerseys in their early 20s.
Yeah, so far you have to be encouraged if you're a Rams fan or someone that faded pro bettors and went over 6.5 wins on the season, that this is probably not going to be an epic disaster for McVay and Stafford. In saying that, you faced a familiar opponent in Seattle week 1 with an entire offseason to prepare for something that you knew would be coming. And Seattle's defense appears to be a little down. The secondary hasn't really taken that next step. I mean, Seattle's defense just allowed Andy Dalton, the Panthers' offense, on a short week across the country with a bottom-of-the-barrel receiver group to be successful in 53% of passes, the third worst mark allowed this week so far. So that's who you played in week 1. And then once the 49ers went away from their patented zone coverages in the second half, the Rams had a negative 0.36 EPA per play in that second half. Now, you kind of hinted at the Bengals defense. Let's see what Lou Anarumo comes up with tonight, because it was pretty bleak against the Baltimore offense. Not a lot of adjustments made, couldn't figure out how to stop the ground game. We figured that would be the least of our concerns as the Bengals front 4. We thought the secondary could have some issues, right? The Bengals are changing over. It's a completely young secondary. That unit's been torched through 2 games, 25th in defensive pass efficiency, 30th in EPA per pass allowed. I mean, you think about some of the matchups that this Bengals defense has had. It's the Browns in a monsoon and a less than 100% Ravens offense, and somehow you've managed to give up 0.58 EPA per pass the first 2 weeks. Think about that. Almost a 1/6 of a point every time the opponent drops back to pass. I think the positive here, if you're a Bengals fan, the defense knows that it needs to step up a little bit if Burrow's out, and you typically get that 1-game surge. You have a little bit more of a stable target in the pocket this week with Matthew Stafford, right? You don't really have to worry about his mobility like you did with Watson and Lamar. From a market perspective, right, grabbing the points early with the Rams, knowing Burrow's availability was in question, was very smart, right? The asymmetric risk investment. I have a weird feeling here, Todd, if the Rams turn into that 1.5-point favorite near close, that respected bettors will think that's too much of an over-adjustment and kind of believe what Jordan Palmer has said, the quarterback guru. They'll believe what T. Higgins said, and that Jake Browning is, air quotes, a baller. Right, and I think some bettors will want to have some liability tied to a desperate 0-2 Bengals team at a depressed price. That's kind of my feeling if this were to get to Rams minus 1.5.
It's always interesting to try and figure out how the market responds to key injuries, who's overvalued, who's undervalued. We know quarterbacks move the needle, especially the elite ones, more than any other player. in the sport, but that's the cat and mouse game that all of us love. I'm interested to see when the Bengals ultimately make the determination if Joe Burrow will be out there or he won't. We know that they signed a backup quarterback in Reed Sinnett earlier, as they only had one on the roster. And some of the reviews, if you spend time in any of the Bengals blogs with folks that are somewhat connected to that organization, say they never took the backup quarterback position all that seriously after Brandon Allen left and headed off to the 49ers in terms of what their contingency plan was going to be behind Joe Burrow should he miss time for injury. And I think a lot of these teams, look, the Colts never did it with Peyton Manning, and sometimes when you're trying to spend money and allocate in other areas, you can't be deep at every single position. So we'll wait and see exactly how this unfolds. The betting market will obviously tell us significantly faster than some of the NFL insiders that are out there for the game tonight. You can follow Payne on X at Payne Insider. You can follow me there as well at Todd Fuhrman. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. Payne, we went a little bit longer than anticipated for a Monday morning program, but a lot of action-packed information. Wasn't sure if there was anything else that you would like to divulge to our listeners before we reconvene with Brad Powers on Wednesday to dive back into the college football schedule.
That's everything. Went about an hour and 15 minutes here. We did have the extra game, so that was probably the reason for the length. Fortunately, we get back to like a normal Monday night schedule. I'm not a big fan of the 2-game system on Mondays. Are you?
No, it's a lot to process. I mean, I like bookending the week with one game on Thursday that you can give your undivided attention to, one game on Monday, even if it happens to be a dud, that you just do so much in terms of trying to comprehend everything that you're seeing in front of you with a full Sunday slate that it's nice to have that at least exhale on Monday Night Football. So when you have 2 games, it's tougher to keep track of, especially when the 2 games are overlapping essentially for 2/3 of the contest.
Yep. Yeah, so, I completely agree.
Kind of my takeaway. So best of luck to all of you, our loyal Bet the Board listeners, with wherever your investments take you this fine Monday night, whether it's to Tampa for the Buccaneers and Eagles showdown or to the late game in the Queen City where the Bengals will welcome in the Rams. We wish you nothing but the best of luck, and hopefully we'll see you at the window.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Bet the Board. Make sure you follow Todd and Payne on X. Todd is at Todd Fuhrman. That's TODDFUHRMAN. And Payne is at Payne Insider. That's PAYNEINSIDER. Don't forget, our weekly newsletter comes with an additional best bet. Have that delivered to your inbox by clicking the link atop the podcast show notes. And most importantly, subscribe and download Bet the Board. We're on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Wondery, YouTube, Google Podcasts, and all your other major platforms.